everyone. Welcome to this video. My name is Amir Hakmi. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with AWS. And this is a quick tutorial that I put together fairly quickly in regard of a recent announcement that was made by AWS yesterday on May 7th, which is around Amazon Bedrock Studio. And for those who don't know, Bedrock is a managed service provided by AWS to make it really easy for customers to build and scale generative AI applications with foundation models or FMs from a variety of different vendors like Anthropic, Meta, Cohere, Amazon, and a few others as well. And Bedrock Studio, think of it as a tool that for builders to experiment and build what I call it sophisticated applications. And in fact, I was blown away by its capability and how easy it is to actually use it. And in fact, that's the main reason why I wanted to kind of make this video, because I feel like this is really cool. And I was waiting for this tool, for this announcement for a while, and finally it made its way. Keep in mind that this is still in preview. And because I'm an AWS employee, I have access to it at this point and I can experiment with it. But hopefully all of you at some point will be able to actually access it and use it. And the tutorial is, and in this case, for me, I'm just building an application, what I call it an Athena query API for generative AI, and how you can actually build it from the studio itself. And I put this together fairly quickly. In a matter of probably like 30 minutes, I was able to put this whole thing together. And I'm able to have what I call it an agent that can take my questions in natural language, translate that into SQL, execute, and query a database, and come back with the results back. Now, this diagram is just to kind of put things in perspective, and just to show you what's really happening and what you're going to kind of be looking at in this tutorial. Think of me as an actor, as a user, all the way to the left, and I have access to the Bedrock Studio. I want to do an experimentations. I already have a database. In this case, I'm just leveraging Amazon Athena, where I can actually execute SQL queries against the data that I have in my S3 bucket, which I'm not showing, but you get the idea. And how do I do that? You leverage what we call it some kind of compute layer. In this case, I'm leveraging Lambda. It's our serverless compute. And then I have all that in front of, I have an Amazon API gateway that sits in front of the Lambda function. And I want to experiment. I want to see, can I interact with this API gateway from the studio itself? And the answer is yes, you can. And this is where the beauty comes with Bedrock, where you can define what we call it action groups. And don't worry, I will show you what an action group is and how you can define the schema, which is, think of it as the instruction for the model for Bedrock to know, how do I interact with this API gateway, and what do you really want me to kind of interact and get data from? So going back to Bedrock, if I go here to this panel, and I navigate all the way below, I go to Bedrock Studio. Again, it's still in preview, but you access that. And there are a few things that your AWS admin has to kind of do and put together. Something we call it configuration of an IAM identity center, or think of it as an SSO integration, and which I will not cover in this tutorial, because that's, I mean, even though it's important, but I mean, eventually that will happen. I really want to show you the actions of you as a builder, where you're going to experiment with. But in this case, let's imagine that you have it already set up and your admin is cool and they put it for you out there. Eventually you will have a URL, and that's what you care about. You click on this URL, or somebody will share it with you. And because we have SSO enabled, you automatically will log in, and that's it. That's your Amazon Bedrock Studio, where you can do experimentations. And here we have two modes. We have the Explorer mode, where it's probably, you've seen this somewhere else, where you select the model of interest. And let's say I select Claude Sonnet. And here you enter the prompt. You can, in fact, actually even upload a file if you want to, but you get the idea. That's pretty straightforward. We've seen this before. What is more interesting is the build model, and that's where things get more interesting. You can go ahead and create a new project. Let's give it a name. My new project. I already have that here, and let's say number 4. It's not a new project anymore, but you hit create, and that may take up to a minute to finish. But think of the project as a container that you can isolate from other projects that is going on. So let's say you have a use case to build some generative AI tool, and you want to kind of isolate that from other kind of experimentations. That's where you want to build that project in there. Let's give it a minute to finish, but you get the idea. I already have 3 different projects set up. One for demo, one a quick Athena agent, which is kind of similar, and my default one, which was created yesterday when I first logged in. So usually it takes about a minute. They say may take up to 2 minutes, but it should be fairly quick. And here you have a drill down. You have a drop down list. You can select your project, but here we go. We have it. Our new project number 4 is created. Now you get into this view where you can see I have 0 applications and I have 0 components. Components is really around what functionalities you would like to have in terms of components that can be eventually used inside your applications in here, which we will get to. But in my case, let's imagine that this diagram here, this is a function that I would like to have in place and I need to build it. So let's go ahead and build that. So if I go to Bedrock Studio and I click create components, you click on function. Here you can give it a name. I already have a name here. It's Athena database API calling. You can give it some description, that's optional. And here you need to define a schema, which is pretty straightforward. The schema is really it's based on OpenAPI version 3, and that's for the function itself and for the model to understand, okay, where do I need to go to achieve this task? In this case, executing an API query, executing a SQL query. Where do I go? And that's where you will have this schema defined. You can either import it or you can just copy and paste. And again, this is pretty straightforward template. It just, you need to define the URL for your API gateway. And I'm assuming that you already have an API gateway and a Lambda and Athena created, which for the tutorial, I actually have that as part of this GitHub repo, which is publicly available, and you can feel free to use it. It has a CloudFormation template that will automate this entire process of creating an API gateway and a Lambda function. You just have to assume that there is an Athena database sitting somewhere that you need to kind of pass it as a parameter when you deploy. But again, I already have done that. So I already have the API gateway and the Lambda created. So what I need to do is just to kind of make sure that I pass the correct URL. In this case, I'm just going to change that to this one that I have. Oops, copy paste is not clean. And let me just clean this up. Here we go. My URL start with an HRR something, and then everything remains the same. You don't have to change anything. Feel free to kind of review it in details. The other thing that you need to do that, in fact, I do have authentication enabled, which, the CloudFormation that I mentioned does that by default. So you click on authenticate. Your API needs to be sent in header. Your API key needs to be set as an XAPI key. And here you need to get the value of the API key, which again, you can get from the CloudFormation template that I have in the GitHub repo. It will be automatically created for you as well. You do that and you hit validate schema, and oops, not actually some bug here, but let's click on authenticate again, XAPI, and then enter the key value and then hit create. And that will take probably another minute or 2 to create this function. Here we go. So, that component, which is a function, is created at this point. And again, this function is to interact with an API gateway. If you want to build another function, let's say you have a knowledge base repository that has documents, that has documentations about specific things, you can create it in there. Same thing for the guardrails, but I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. Then the second thing you have to do is now go ahead and create your application, right? And that's where you come here. You first thing you have to do is to select the model that you would like to use within your application. Again, if we go back to this architecture diagram, you need to know, okay, which model is going to drive this entire app for me. And in this case, I'm just going to select Anthropic Claude 3 Sonnet, and you can give it a name. Let's say my first app, let's say text to SQL. And then here you need to define like the system prompt, which is the instruction that you need to provide to your model. In this case, the instruction that I'm providing is pretty straightforward. Probably it can be optimized. I put this together fairly quickly, but really what I'm telling the model that you are a data query master and you're fine-tuned to not only generate SQL queries for Amazon Athena, but also execute it via this provided API endpoint. I'm providing the API endpoint to it. And toward the end, I'm telling the model that you will use this database, and I'm actually providing like the schema, where kind of just a high level of what this database and the tables inside it, what does it look like, so the model can understand when I ask and use a question in natural language, where does it go, which table to go after. So it needs to kind of have that information. Once you do that, you go to functions, and here you will see that by default there is none selected. Now it just showed up as the function that we just created, which is the Athena database API calling. It's available. You click on it, and that's it, really. Now you go ahead and you save, and you're good to go. Now, if you just come here and say, give me max metrics for device 1009, and again, this is based on the data that I have in my database. If your data looks different, obviously your question will look different from mine. But in this case, I just asking the model, give me the max metrics. And what's really happening here, if I may, to kind of minimize this and maybe grab that page. What's really happening here is that, you, Mr. User, you asked a question. Bedrock Studio obviously allowed us to build this app. We're leveraging the model. The model is converting this question into a SQL query. And then the model is also recognizing that, oh, by the way, I do have access to this function that can actually query a database from an API gateway. And by the way, I do have a nice schema. Thank you, Mr. Builder. And then from there, the model will actually execute, the SQL query against the API gateway, which will eventually go to the Lambda function, to the database, and it will make its way back. Now, notice here, it took some time to kind of give me the response back. And that's just because there is some kind of application deployment that's happening when you first ask the question. And that's probably will get improved over time. But here we go, we get the results back, and based on the typical maximum values for the IoT devices, we get the maximum oil level 95%, temperature 120 degrees Celsius, and the maximum pressure is 100 psi. And I do confirm that these are actually values that it's coming from my database. Again, I've built this entire thing in probably less than 5 minutes. Now I understand that you have to have your backbone set up and ready, but those are things that you need to set up once. You don't have to do it every single time. Once you have your API gateway, technically you can just keep experimenting, shutting down this application and go and build something else. This is what I really wanted to show you. Again, my first tutorial, so if I'm kind of scrambling or not being very clear, apologies and please feel free to comment and let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to kind of keep doing these tutorials as well, and happy to kind of answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.